if I give my child this vaccine, they could get autism. And that just is not the case whatsoever. There's no correlation whatsoever, no causation either. Mm-hmm. It's just, I mean, that guy very much not only screwed our perspective of vaccines long term, but has also just caused so many other complications now because people don't want to get vaccines because of that. Do it. Let's cook.
How's it going, man?
Not too bad. How are you doing?
Doing solid, man. I just want to say, just before we get started, that I have a lot of respect and appreciation for the work that you do with your research. I just think that I've talked to a lot of athletes on the podcast and people who've gone through either in their own life like injuries or disorders, and people who are close to people who have different kinds of disorders. I just think it does something to you where you can always in your day-to-day life see the contrast between you and the world around you, and always ask yourself those questions like, what would it be like if I didn't have this thing holding me back? And I just feel like I know that injuries like an ACL tear, probably nothing even compared to having to live with something like autism or Down syndrome for your whole life. And meeting some of the people that have that disease and go through it, I can only imagine how difficult it is, not only for them, but even their families who have to live with them. So any research that helps us to keep understanding what this disease is, how can we prevent it, and how can we help people who actually have it live close to normal lives. I just have a lot of appreciation for the work you do, and it seems like you care a lot about it, just talking to you in the gym and knowing the hours and hours you put in. So a lot of respect for it, and I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate you saying all that. Again, I just love the work that I've been able to do, and I recognize that it has a really critical part within, just the Down syndrome community, also just neurodevelopmental disorders in general. There's very little that is still currently known, and it's just been a great way for me to be able to give back to a large part of the community that I've been a part of for so many years. So,
yeah, I think that for a long time it wasn't even recognized as a disease, especially even more recent history, like 1900s. No, or when did it first when did research in this area first begin? And when did people first come around to the fact that this is actually a disorder versus something foreign?
So, we keep using the word disease, and I kind of want to backtrack on that as well, because it is just a disorder. And a lot of these individuals, what they suffer from is not Down syndrome itself. It's a lot of the complications that come with having that extra chromosome, which causes other health detriments down the line. So what it really is when you have that extra chromosome, that extra 21st chromosome, you have an extra copy of all those genes that are also on it. And when that happens, those extra genes and their changes in expression level is actually what causes various health complications, such as the cognitive deficits within the population. They have heart defects as well, where most of them will have to have a heart surgery at some point in their life. They can have bowel issues as well, where their bowel muscles aren't just propelling the waste through the system properly. And there's also, most of them have cataracts as well that require surgery. There's just all these other complications that arise because of the extra chromosome itself. But it's not that these individuals really have a disease. It's just a developmental thing, because at least with disease, that's something that you think about we can cure it and it'll be perfectly normal and fine. But with Down syndrome as well, it's more of what can we do to help remove some of the barriers that, as you were talking about earlier, where their parents have to worry about, because almost every single, what's the statistic? I think it's 50% of Down syndrome individuals start to show Alzheimer's symptoms very early on, within their 40s.
Wow.
And will continue to develop that. And I think it's almost every single, it's 99% of the Down syndrome population ends up having Alzheimer's early onset within their lifetime, which again is just an added stressor for their family as well to have to work through and deal with.
Wow. Can you help me understand, I guess before we get into the deep understanding of what autism really is and what Down syndrome really is, can you first, what would you describe as a difference between a disorder and a disease? Is a disease primarily something you think of, you get it and you can cure it? And what do you define as a disorder and even a mental disorder?
Yeah, so I think a mental disorder is something that, again, as you mentioned, it's something that you don't get or contract. It's something that you were probably born with, or there might have been external environmental stimuli or something that had happened to you that caused it to like CTE, for example. Like that could also be something along the lines of having an external factor happen to you, but it's not like catching a disease. Disease comes from like a bacteria, a virus, or your own like body kind of working against itself. But I mean, even then, like if you talk about like autoimmune disorders, it's something where that's your body itself. So again, it's not something that you catch. Disease is, again, more like
a sick.
Yeah.
Understood. Got it. So do we, with the research that's been increasing in the recent decades, have we begin to understand, I know with Down syndrome, it's the extra chromosome. With things like autism, I think it's still a little bit less known, like where it stems from, but have we made steps toward understanding, like, I know that there's a primary genetic component to it, but I'm also curious about, is it solely genetic, or are there other risk factors or reasons why we've seen correlated with the prevalence of autism? Like, what have you learned in the recent decades?
There's a lot of external factors as well, and a lot of that does just stem from, when we're kids, we're little sponges. We soak up the entire world around us, and whatever happens is what shapes us into who we are now. And for a lot of individuals, there is that genetic component where you might be predisposed to it. And one of the genes that we look at in Down syndrome also seems to be prevalent within autism as well, just on the opposite side of things. But you also do have that external factor too. Like there are people where like you can learn behaviors, especially like if you look into like attachment theory, for example, there's a lot of things where a lot of the behaviors kind of overlap because of how individuals were raised, especially when they were kids. You can see like there's hypervigilance within a lot of people with insecure attachment styles because they always have to be aware of how like their parents were acting or what was going on, to be like aware if something bad was going to happen to them or if they were in a safe space. And there's also a lot of individuals where they are within that space and they have that attachment issue and they want to like have control over like these little things. So like you could see like, oh, like someone wants to make their bed a very specific way every morning, and you'd be like, oh, that's kind of like, that's a very behavior that's like similar to autism. And it could be, there could be overlap there, but then it could also be something along the lines of like, well, that's just them like taking control of a factor of their life that their brain is just externally like taken in from when they were a kid. They didn't have a whole lot of control, and so that's just their way of like taking it back in an extent.
Got it. Understood. Do we understand like what is happening in the brain when someone has autism? And also, is it something that you're born, like it's already been determined you have it, even if it's diagnosed a few years later? Like, is it like you can't really get it if you've never had, if you didn't have it originally, you can't get it later, right? It's something that you're born with and then it's established, right? So do we understand like what happens in like the brain when in an autistic patient?
Yeah, so we don't know fully, but basically in simpler terms, so we have neurons in the brain, and we have like two main ones. We have excitatory neurons that send excitatory positive signals, and then we have inhibitory neurons that send negative signals and make it harder for neurons to fire and work. But you want to have like a nice balance between those, where like in a, I don't want to say normal, I'm going to use the word typical. So in a neurotypical brain, you're going to have a nice balance of like, it's not a true number, but let's say 50-50. And so that's what allows for like a good balance of negative and positive. What we're seeing in individuals with autism, they have too many of those positive signals, either from having not enough negative neurons or having too many positive neurons. We don't really have the science on that yet. But what we're seeing is that when you have too many of those positive signals, the brain is overexcited, overstimulated, and that's what it seems to be with that autistic behavior. That's right. Like, especially like when you see that like stimming, that's like a big one, is what we like hypothesize.
And then they also are much more anxious as well, right? They have a greater prevalence of that.
I'm not really sure on that one. Okay. I don't have the info on that.
Got it. So most people who have autism, I know there's a spectrum to it. So it's not like everyone who's autistic has it, the same degree of it. I'm curious, like, how big is the standard deviation from like someone who has like extreme autism to people live with even something like a minor kind of autism where they're still able to do most functions properly, but they're still kind of diagnosed with it because of a certain criteria, I guess, they use? Like, how does the range lie on the spectrum of like how, like, is it a valid question to ask like how autistic are you? Like, is there like a spectrum of this as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a spectrum, as you like mentioned, and there's a wide range of it. You have people that are very high functioning that are very like, they just have like, there's that meme where it's like, it's my autism, I get to choose the special interest. But I mean, there is a lot of truth to that, and there's also just so much information. Like, it's just such a wide range. You have very high functioning people, but then you have other individuals that, you know, they're nonverbal, or they aren't able to even be really mobile either. Like,
Really?
Yeah, there's just like there's such a wide range of it, and it's just important to recognize and could just see that like it is on a spectrum, and like technically by that definition, we're all on said spectrum as well. It's just we're on that very high functioning side too.
Yeah. So I know a lot of what does your research look like? Like, do you work directly with patients ever? Or?
No, so I'm not really involved on the patient side. We do occasionally interact with patients, but we'll be collecting like samples from said patients to utilize for growing our own like neurons from patient samples.
Oh, got it. Okay.
Yeah.
Is there like a specific focus of your research? Like, I know there's a lot of, I guess, sides to this, like working toward understanding like why it happens, working to understand like what's happening in a patient who has it, and then working towards like potential cure. I don't know if like, is there ever potential for finding a cure to this? Like, what do you think about like at least the research as it continues on?
Yeah, I mean, by that, like the idea, there is like a cure, but by that same definition, when people start talking about a cure, it's feels for me a little bit eugenic-y to an extent, because I've worked at a summer camp for individuals with neurodevelopmental disorders for, 4 or 5 years, and it's an amazing experience. Like, these individuals, they are not suffering. They're having a great time. Like, they love life more than most people would, honestly. Like, if you look at other people, like, something minor might get you down, but for them, it's just like, just a stepping stone. Like, they're just super happy and they're just great. Like, they just love life, and especially like the Down syndrome community. So for me, I look at it from a perspective of, if you have a mother and she's in her pregnancy, she's in her late terms, and she finds out that her child has Down syndrome. Well, there's a population of people that might want to abort the child because, like, I don't know the quality of life I can provide for this, and I understand I understand people's choice on that. But by that same definition, if someone found out that genetically their child would be deaf or blind, if we said, it'd be a lot harder for people to say, like, yeah, I can support them aborting that child. So
I see.
Yeah, I think that it's a little bit eugenic-y just because the Down syndrome community does still have its own population, its own culture. And it's very similar to like the deaf community, where they have their own language, their own culture, their own perspectives. And so a lot of people within the deaf community, like after a child is born, and people are very against like them having a lot of like medical intervention done so that way they can hear again, because it's not something that needs to be fixed per se.
Right.
So at least within my own research, what we focus on more specifically isn't a cure for it. What we're trying to do is try and find a way that we could make it so individuals with Down syndrome are able to remove some of the cognitive deficits that are there as a barrier for them, so that way they can lead independent lives like in the long term.
And is that mainly focused like real life activities they can do, like to help develop like neuroplasticity or something like that, to help them improve their cognitive skills? Or
yeah, like that's a huge thing as well. I mean, when you have early intervention, you're able to have individuals that are able to perform so much better. And I mean, we've seen that a lot more recently now. Like there was a Down syndrome individual that was the first Down syndrome individual elected to a government office was, I believe, last fall. Wow. I think it was somewhere in Spain. And we just had the first Down syndrome lawyer, at least within the U.S., go through.
And these people are like training. Fully able to do their job independently.
Yeah.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And did they start off in a rough place, and through intervention they were able to get there? Or what's their story?
I don't really know the specifics on a lot of their life, but I just know that early intervention can go so far within these populations. And again, like, the brain is so cool, as you talked about with the plasticity side of it. Like, it's able to just, we can learn so many cool things, and it's always like rewiring, making new connections.
It's fascinating, bro.
Yeah, and I mean, we see that within all populations: neurotypical, neuroatypical, autistic, Down syndrome. Brain functions the same way, mostly in terms of like being able to make those connections. It's just a lot harder for some individuals to be able to make those connections, biologically speaking. Right. And that's what we're trying to work with and see what we can do to better understand what's actually going on in the brain and what we could do to help to have like a therapeutic approach there.
You mentioned that you add interventions to their lives to help them to advance to the state that they've been able to get to. Like, what do those interventions look like?
A lot of it is just like getting them into like early education programs that are actually like beneficial for them. I know the school that I went to, Hope College, they had this really nice educational system for individuals with neurodevelopmental disorders that tried to really gear them towards being able to live an independent life. So they lived in their own house with like other neuroatypical individuals also living there as their roommates. And they would have a typical role in being able to just like provide for yourself, be able to like live on your own. But they would also have individuals that had specialties in special education training, so that way they would also be like living there as their RA basically, and like helping to take care of them, making sure that nothing bad was actually happening, but striving to help them gain their independence, learn on their own, and to be able to like again strive for being able to live independently.
I see. And you did mention before that a lot of them are still live pretty happy lives, so it's not necessarily like something that needs to be fixed or cured if they're doing well relatively, and maybe with the early intervention they can even advance to a place where they can live pretty independent lives. And I've always wondered that even when I've met people who have certain mental disorders, they always do seem to be very happy and like filled with energy. I wonder, do we know why that is true? Like, why did they seem to be so like maybe carefree and joyful all the time? Do we understand that from like a neurological perspective, or?
I don't really know. I think that also it's just like they have a different perspective on life as well. I know for a lot of like the Down syndrome community, especially like at the camp, like they're just so happy to be at some type of a setting that they're actually able to perform tasks that we kind of take for granted. Like one of the campers that I had, he was able to do a high ropes course, but he was like able to like go through with the help of a local football team and like complete the course on his, like be able to complete it. And it was just something that, again, such a simple thing that you and I could do so easily, but for him, that was on top of the world. He felt like a champion because of that. And also just being able to go down to Lake Michigan. Like we had some campers that were not as mobile as others, but having like wheelchairs that were able to go on the sand and be able to like push the campers there so they could actually like be down at the lake. Again, it's just something that they are so grateful for, like these small little things, these small victories that they don't always get.
Yeah. I've also heard stories of people with neurological disorders that because they fail to access one part of their brain, they're able to enhance a different part of their brain more deeply because their brain gets trained, I think, in another way. Have you seen any cases?
It's like the savant idea, I believe, right? Is
I've
that
not
what
heard
it's
of
called?
that. No.
I might also just be throwing that word out of my ass. I don't know. But I do know that that's not like, people have like talked about that, and like there's like a show, there's, what is it? It's like The Good Doctor or something, where it's like, oh, there's someone that's autistic and they're like really good at this other thing, and that's not necessarily the case.
Really?
There's no like real scientific evidence for that.
Okay.
I mean, there's definitely like some individuals out there, but I just don't think that that's like,
I see.
yeah, there's no real evidence for it.
I was thinking of a specific case. I read the story of someone, I think her name was Temple Grand something. I just want to confirm. I don't want to mess up her name. Have you heard of her before?
I don't think so.
Temple Grandin. Yeah, I believe she's still alive. She's 77 years old. Yeah, I was reading her story in a book like last year, but she was born in 1947 and diagnosed with autism when she was 3 years old. And, in the 50s, from what I read, it's a little bit more of a struggle at the time to live in a society with that. I think we didn't have as many early intervention programs and research done in this field at the time. So she had a pretty rough childhood through going up 10 teenage years. And the doctors wanted to institutionalize her, and her parents were against that, and they wanted to try to help her live like a normal life. So she struggled socially, obviously, with the conditions, that what it does to your brain. She struggled with mathematics. I think in her specific case, obviously there's different ways it kind of manifests, but in her case, she struggled to understand words if she couldn't picture them. Like a mic, if I can see a mic, I can understand what it means, but an abstract word that I can't picture, she would struggle to understand what that meant, meaning she struggled a lot with language, mathematics. So, she went to some special private schools where she was able to at least be around similar kind of people. But again, growing up, she's always had that struggle, and no one really knew like what she'd amount to or anything in life. And she did have early memories of being at her aunt's farm when she was younger. And at her aunt's farm, she felt really connected to the horses there. She felt like she could understand them really well. And I think one reason people later propose is that since her mind works more in images because she can't think of words unless she can picture them, a lot of animals think in the same way because they don't have a formulated language system as intricate as humans, right? So they think mostly in pictures, which is kind of cool to me because I can't even imagine what thinking in pictures would feel like. I feel like we're always thinking in words, but so she felt that she was able to understand them really well and something about them made sense. And she also got really obsessed with the chutes that cattle would walk through before they're vaccinated. So chutes are like it's like a machine that would squeeze the cattle to kind of calm them down. And I think what I've read about is also like autistic people don't like being hugged because they kind of feel like they're out of control. I mean, at least that was true in her case. Because they don't like feeling like they're out of control. But she in her, like in biographies she recounted like wanting to be squeezed, which is an odd thing. But again, when you have disorders in your brain, there's like these weird associations it makes with different things. So one day her aunt let her go into the cattle chute, and since that day she's been obsessed with like animals. And I think with her disorder, she was extremely anxious unless she was able to focus deeply on something. So she ended up just doing a lot of research on animals and emotions and the chutes. And she started observing that when at farms, she would notice that the way animals were being treated there was kind of inefficient, but also it wasn't good because of the way the animals felt in those situations. Like if the ramp was too high, then she would sense like more of fear in the animals. And she, for some reason, had such an intuitive understanding of how they felt. And after going to, I think, Arizona State and then for a PhD, and she ended up going to University of New Hampshire, I believe, for undergrad. And she ended up studying animal sciences or something. And despite autism, she's become really successful as she goes to farms. She does some weird things where she like touch the animals, understand them, and propose things for the farmers to adjust in their farm, and they would actually realize that the animals seem more at ease and more efficient, which actually helped them get profit. And although if she gives speeches like she can't speak properly, like people will feel like she's saying the same thing over and over again. She doesn't make eye contact. Despite that disorder, I think what it did maybe was that it was able to help her brain think in a different way where maybe she felt more of an intuitive understanding of like how animals worked in her specific case. So I just remember that story popped in my head, and I was wondering if that's kind of a general thing. Maybe you've seen a pattern in other people or not, or that's like special to her case. But I just remember like that was one case of autism that I remember reading in a book that was pretty fascinating to me.
Yeah, well, I think that it's also just like, as you kind of talked about earlier, like it's not really like a savant thing in terms of like, oh, like they just had like a natural talent. I think that it's more about, she found something that like really interested her and just was something that she was able to dedicate so much time into learning. And I think that's what like really propelled her to find that success long term. And also like, again, like being able to maybe better understand the animals, that could actually be a factor there as well. So like having like, I don't want to say a predisposition, but some like a differently wired brain in terms of like how she was actually able to think about something. So yeah, seeing it from that different perspective.
Yeah. I mean, go back to neuroscience. Like, I think the brain is so confusing and weird sometimes when you just think about it. Like, I was thinking the other day, like, I guess since we were talking about like deaf people before, they can't hear. Do they also like think in only images? Is that a way, or do they think in sign language, or like, what do you think their thoughts would be like?
That's what I wonder as well. Yeah, because again, it's just like because people do like. You have your own internal monologue, what is like a different individual's. Well, you could apply that to anyone, right?
Yeah.
Like, everyone has their own internal monologue. It's always a little bit different.
Yeah.
But I mean, language does kind of shape our world to an extent in how we perceive it. I know that like when we are talking about like, I think that it's the Russian language. They have a lot more words for blue, and so they're able to better distinguish different shades of blue than we would be. And when you also have like, there's like indigenous tribes for like other areas. And they don't have they have words for 1, 2, 3, and many. So then when you're like trying to be able to have them like articulate, like they aren't able to better understand math, or it's like a little bit different in terms of like actually being able to count. So again, it's just like our world is shaped entirely different because of just our language. Because again, our language, we talk, our brain is what's doing that, forming those connections, which then again shapes how we view the world, which I think is super cool.
It is really cool. And it's cool how there have been many, back when we were hunter-gatherers, there weren't like a centralized global tribe network that we have today. It was cool how languages always seem to manifest in different societies around the world in their own kind of unique way, but there's these patterns you see language to language, and it's something that is so unique to humans especially, which is, I think I've read about like other animals having similar kind of ways of communicating, that some of the more intelligent animals, but I think language is such a cool thing, and I think we're living in a really interesting time now when we're starting to generalize language across the entire population of the world. And I mean, there are downsides to that, obviously, with cultures dying and all that, but I think the ability to communicate with the whole world at once is something that people years ago would never been able to believe, man.
Oh yeah, I think it's really cool to like think about the human race has always been evolving just to be able to yap better, which I think is just fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I was yapping at the gym for like 2 hours today. So.
Yeah, that's an everyday thing.
Yeah, I was done with my workout after an hour, and then she's like, "Oh, my friends are here, so might as well keep talking." But yeah, we do just as a species, we love to yap.
Yeah, that's what we do here for hours every week.
Yeah, I mean that's why we have podcasts, right? Because
Exactly.
we love to yap.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Yeah. So when did you start to get interested in this field of research? Like, was when you were in high school and then when you went to Hope College, like, where did you see your interests start to range? Like,
So for me, I'm on the pre-med track, so applying to medical schools right now. So I was at some points rotating within a clinical setting and was volunteering and spending a lot of time with patients. And there was one patient that came in for a heart surgery, and he had Down syndrome. And I remember like really connecting with him. We talked a lot about Michigan football and like his superheroes and whatever else he liked. And he was there for about a month or so. And I just remember really connecting and spending time with him. But then not really, I talked with the physicians and very little was known about why this heart condition was happening and what they could actually do to help it long term. They were able to go in and do a surgical intervention, but that doesn't provide a long-term fix for this patient. And what they end up doing is it's just very difficult for them to have that long-term high quality of life. Like eventually a lot of these diseases end up just compounding and just making it very difficult for them. But we don't know why. And so after
sorry to cut you off. What age were you at this point?
Oh, I was probably like 18 or 19. Wow. So it was my first or second year in college, yeah. So freshman or sophomore year. And so I had that experience and I was thinking, wow, that's crazy that we know so little about this. And part of why we know so little about it is it's complicated because when you have a whole extra chromosome, there's all these other genes that are on there that are also interacting and doing different things. So very few people are studying it because it's complicated. There's very little funding that goes into it as well. And then the Down syndrome population, when there are actual like treatments or ideas, they're routinely left out of clinical trials. For anything Alzheimer's related, despite them being a great, I don't want to say a model, I don't want to treat them like a scientific project, but like they are a great model for early onset because all of them get it and all of them have the plaques that are associated with Alzheimer's disease very early on, but they're excluded from clinical trials just because they don't think that they set like a good standard in terms of like the cognitive ability for being able to say before or after, which I think is just, I don't agree with that at all because you could just have a different test and you just do it differently. It's a little bit separate. But yeah, so for me, seeing that, I recognized that I'd already been doing research in a botany field for a little while, and I recognized that I had a good talent for it, and I wanted to be able to apply that to a population in a way that like would actually make a difference for an underserved individual. So I started working in the research lab that I was in here. I applied as like a summer internship, ended up getting that position, was here for about 12 weeks doing research, and then came back the next summer, continued said research, and now have been working there full time since graduating in 2020.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a great storyline. So you said you were in botany before? Is that like flowers or?
Yeah, just like plants. Yeah.
So how'd you make that maneuver then? You said that you had skill sets you developed through botany, and you said that you can apply that here. What are those like skill sets?
I just like started to understand how research worked. I had been working in that botany lab for about a year or so, and I also had done a summer project there. And so it just allowed me to like read scientific papers, understand the scientific method, and I realized through that period that while I do love botany, it's not the direction that I really wanted to go. And then I think I had just taken a neuroscience class, and I was like, oh, the brain is super cool, as we've like been talking about the whole time. It is super cool.
Right.
And so I was like, well, I want to like do some neuroscience research. And then it just kind of worked out where this was the lab that I was able to be placed into, and it was the type of research that I wanted to do, and just everything just kind of fit so well together, just like kind of like a puzzle piece.
So the day you talked to that one Down syndrome patient, do you think that was like the one pivotal turning point?
I think it definitely helped. But I've been around individuals with neurodevelopmental disorders for my entire life, really.
Really?
Yeah.
Like close people you know, or?
Oh, yeah. One of my family members, I believe, he was not tested, but he's probably very much on the spectrum in some extent, which has been very difficult for me to see because I wish that there was more that we could do, but again, it's not my place to be able to say like, oh, I think like he needs some intervention or some help. But I mean, he's high functioning. He's doing very well. He has almost full independence, but still, it's like it has been hard for us to like see how that's been going for him. But also on top of that as well, like I've had individuals in my school. I ran cross country with quite a few of them as well, and I'm just like I'm very like a lot of them are just really close friends for me, and I recognize that they have a lot of barriers in terms of being able to obtain full independence, and also they're going to have a lot of health complications down the line. And I just want to be able to do what I can to better understand what's actually going on that biological level. So hopefully we can get better treatments, better interventions, so that way we could at least like remove those barriers that they may have to gaining independence, or help to remove some of those mechanisms that will progress to disease down the line.
I see what you mean. When you spend time with people close to you, whether you're friends or even the patient you talked about earlier, and you spend time with them, you talk to them, what are the thoughts and feelings you have when you interact with someone who faces these barriers? Like, is there something that goes through your mind?
I just treat them like a normal human being, like, and that's what they are. Like, there's nothing. I don't like saying that there's nothing wrong with them. Like, it's a tricky thing to like tread the path, but there's not. They're just neuroatypical, and what they want is to be treated like a normal human being because they are a human being, and I think that's always for me at the center of how I treat everyone in general, and I think that's just a good thing. Is just have empathy for other people outside of yourself. And that's just how I've been going about it with all of them as well.
Do you ever find that difficult to do?
I don't think so. Maybe like at the very beginning, it was more of like, I treaded more carefully and was just like, oh, I don't want to say something that would be mean or rude. But as it's just been going on, and you just get kind of used to it. And I think that says so much about being exposed to diversity to an extent, right? Like you'll have people, I mean, for like a lack of a better term, like you take someone from the deep south and they've only been in schools with other individuals that are completely white. We won't say racist, but just like completely white. And then you take them into a setting like Michigan where it's so diverse and there's so many different people. And then they're going to be like, I feel like a little bit more on edge. Like they're going to be like, oh, I don't want to say something rude or mean. And they're like very much like backtracked. It's like, it's a different setting for them. So.
Yeah. And I'm glad you're able to do that, because I think for a lot of people it can be difficult sometimes because it all lingers in the back of your mind that you have to be careful. And it seems that with time and practice and being around these people, you've learned to kind of be more comfortable. And I think it's a good skill set to just be treating everyone with empathy. And it's good to meet someone who's able to carry themselves that way and treat everyone the same. So
yeah, and I just think that's how we have to treat everyone, right? Like,
yeah.
I mean, I can be a real asshole when I want to be, but I try not to be.
Yeah. So is it? I've read that some of these conditions, including, let's hit on the neurological disorders first, like autism, Down syndrome, and then even other disorders in general, or even diseases like cancer, cardiovascular disease. I think there's been a huge upsurge in recent decades of the prevalence of these, and I don't know to the degree to which that's true. Like, is it a true statement to say that currently the prevalence of diseases such as autism, Down syndrome, and I know for sure some of the diseases like dementia and Parkinson's are also increasing, but that's also because our life expectancy is going up. So do you think that it is accurate to say that the prevalence of these disorders that you research specifically have gone up over the years?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, but I think part of that is we have better resources in terms of testing. So with Down syndrome, it's very obvious. Like that individual has an X chromosome or they don't. You can just do genetic testing and see that. With autism, we can do some genetic testing. We can see some of those like risk factors or these genes that are like, oh, there's a mutation in this gene that like we've always like figured is involved in autism. But again, like it's a much lengthier process in terms of actually diagnosing autism. And then I think that's why autism has increased in the prevalence, because we have better resources for testing. We have a better understanding of it. For Down syndrome, I think that's also been going up, but mostly because a lot of individuals are having kids a lot later. And so for specifically Down syndrome, the risk of that increases as the mother's age increases. It doesn't really increase as much on the father's side. It's sadly on the mother's, but the males are the ones that are usually the ones that are the problem for infertility. It's all the caffeine that we drink nowadays. But yeah, but it's just, I think that that's been why the rise in Down syndrome has been going up to an extent. But we have so many more interventions and things that we can do to try and help these individuals long term, which is great as well.
Yeah, understood. And so I guess there's two things we touch on there, because I think the second point you brought up is more of like a cultural shift that's caused it. But you first touched on that we just have resources better now, so we're better at reporting when someone actually has one. So do you think that in the past it was just poor reporting that was the reason why it was a lower prevalence, or do you think that there's just if you look at a sample size of today versus like 100 years ago and 1,000 years ago, do you think there'll be the same number of people who have disorders like autism?
Autism, I would say maybe. And I mean, like, if we're looking at, and we're going back to like that idea of like individuals having their special interests or being really good at something. I mean, like Shakespeare, that guy was just like, yeah, I'm just gonna write in sonnets the entire time. And it's like, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Great work as an artist and a writer, but definitely like makes you wonder.
Really? You think that Shakespeare might have been autistic, or
could have been? I don't know that information myself, but again, it's just like, if we're going by that idea like you had earlier with like someone being really good at something and like it not being like a very common skill, it could be. But
well, I don't know. I mean, do you know a lot about his like life, like from what you read? Like what gives you that intuition?
I just know about like the sonnets and just how like
it's pretty crazy. He wrote a lot.
Iambic pentameter. That's the word for it. Yeah.
What does that mean?
He just wrote in this like very specific style for like everything. Like all of his works are in.
So there's a pattern.
Yeah. Well, it's like also very hard to do, and it's just like, wow, like he's just an incredible fucking writer. It's amazing. Yeah.
Well, I definitely think that, considering the genetic component of it, it's definitely been around, but maybe prevalence going up. Sure, it could be a reporting issue, but then we mentioned you mentioned with Down syndrome, having kids later in life for women has been causing an increase in the prevalence of the disease, the disorder. I have to correct myself there. And then with the infertility problems with men, so you primarily associate the fertility problems with men with caffeine, or do you think there's other?
There's so many things. It's
what
lifestyle.
Are some of those? Yeah.
It's a lot of factors, but that's very much just on like the infertility side. Like we can see, it's just lifestyle. It's a lot of like not work. It's a lot of the idea of like sitting at home, not doing a whole lot, not going outside. The caffeine as well definitely does not help. So.
Do you know the scientific connection of like sitting on your ass and infertility? Like, where do we draw the line? How does one lead to the other? Do we know?
I have no idea.
Okay.
Like that's outside of my scope of research. I just know like a little bit about like some of the infertility side, because I do know that women are the ones that go through like the IVF treatments, and they're the ones that are taking all these supplements and pills to try and increase their own fertility. And there's always that like stigma of the male in that relationship that's like not doing as much. It's always on the female, and again, it's usually not the female's fault.
Right.
It's usually the guy is just not performing in terms of like genetically for his sperm.
Well, I know that infertility has drastically increased. I've read studies on that, and I read some work by Dr. Shauna Swan. I don't know if you know who she is. She's primarily saying that one of the main reasons for the infertility increase in men is microplastics.
Yeah, I have heard of that as well. Yeah.
If you just look at the Mojo Dining Hall, if you see them take out a new tray of food, it'll be wrapped in plastic, but in the heater. And we're not the rule is to not put plastic in the microwave because it melts, or the phthalates jump into your food. And if they're having every single tray of our food in the heater coming out wrapped in plastic, then they take the plastic off. I mean, that's how every restaurant does it. That's how Chipotle does it. And microplastics in their food, your lungs are full of microplastics. That makes intuitive sense to me. But then again, I just think that research can be so messy sometimes that it's hard to say, based on this evidence, we know this is the one culprit or that's the culprit. And obviously, sitting down at home is not the best thing either.
But what is it now? There was a study someone tried to do a study on microplastics because we wanted to, better understand its effect on the human population. they couldn't do the study. There was
Why is that?
no control because everyone has microplastics in them. So it's just
Oh no.
yeah. So there is literally no one that we can like actually say and compare and say like, yeah, this is someone without microplastics in them. Compare it to someone that's like in the U.S. that's living a normal U.S. life, like, you know, eating at McDonald's, grabbing stuff, or like there are like plastics in the food. There's no comparison because we just don't have that control.
Yeah, and I think a lot of problems with even these clinical trials is that the time frame of them, because I see that in the food industry a lot, right? You can say that this specific ingredient's not bad for you because control group didn't take it, this group took it, and in 1 week later, this group's fine, that group's fine. But I mean, if you look at any of these chemicals, like aspartame, for example, it's not gonna fuck you up in 1 week. Like it takes 10 years of buildup in your system, and that's the thing where it's like, that's where science gets kind of messy. And as someone in the field, like, what do you think about that whole idea of like epidemiology and clinical trials and this whole mess of?
Yeah, I mean, we saw it when the vaccines were coming out. A lot of people didn't want to get the vaccines because, well, a lot of it was because they really didn't understand the science behind it, which is perfectly valid. I don't think we explained what mRNA was well enough, and that it's been already widely used in clinical trials elsewhere. But it just worked out really well because so many people were getting COVID where, we have a great sample size to actually be able to apply this as a vaccine. But again, people don't really understand how that worked, but then they also were really scared of the long-term health complications from it. Which is, again, very valid. I want, like, especially for, like, if I had a kid and I knew that, like, if my kid gets this vaccine, that could cause, like, a long-term health complication for them, which there's no evidence for that actually happening, but it is, like, a fear, and that's what a lot of people have been, like, really avoiding for, like, going in for getting those COVID vaccines back in the day.
Right. I was trying to figure out, there was something called, I'm not sure if this is the right terminology. There's something called like emergency use listing. Is that what it is? Where I think sometime during late 1900s, I think the flu outbreak was happening. The government of the U.S., I'm forgetting what administration, said that even if you don't go through the full process of getting your vaccine approved by the government, because it's an emergency right now, you can just go ahead and like skip some steps and approve it.
It's not.
You know what that is? What was that
yeah,
called?
I know what you're talking about because they also did apply that with COVID, but it's not that you skip steps.
Okay, how does it work? Yeah.
So what it actually is like, let's say for example, there's a 6-step plan to like get something FDA approved,
right?
And so typically you go in chronological order. You do step 1, step 2, step 3 until you get complete. But a lot of these steps can be done side by side, and so but it just requires more effort, and there's a lot more hoops that you have to jump through bureaucratically speaking, and so instead of steps being skipped, where they said, okay, we're going to take step 1 and step 3, we're doing them together right now. And so they were just done succinctly together, and that's what it really was. There was no steps that were skipped, at least with the COVID vaccine.
So they went through the whole process of getting it.
The entire process was completed.
I know a lot of people I've read online are like worried about like, do we even know like this will not have another impact on us down the road? Like, what are the other implications of this? And I've also read that there was a study once that vaccines might even be linked with autism or something, and I think that got debunked. I
hate that, dude.
There's that. What was that guy's name? What? It started with a W, no?
I just hate that guy.
I think,
with
but
passion.
I'm pretty sure that study in particular was taken down because he faked some data.
Yeah, no, he faked all the data.
Yeah.
There was
you know
nothing,
that story? Tell me that story.
Yeah, there was nothing factual about anything that he posted. He lied about all of the data. Got it published. It was out there for years. It did the damage that it had to do. He lost, not only like that paper was redacted, he lost his license as a doctor. I don't remember if he was a PhD, an MD, or both, but he lost that. Like, he no longer is able to practice at any extent. But the guy's still spouting his bullshit, which sucks. Oh yeah, like he's still writing books about it. He's trying, like, that's his like big break, and like, yeah, like, he's still making a ton of money because of that, because it fed into the fear cycle. And again, like if you're a parent and you have your kid and you're being told from one source that, like if I give my child this vaccine, they could get autism. And that just is not the case whatsoever. There's no correlation whatsoever, no causation either. It's just, I mean, that guy very much not only screwed our perspective of vaccines long term, but has also just caused so many other complications now because people don't want to get vaccines because of that.
Also, definitely a huge growing population of people against it. And I'm trying to understand like where a lot of them come from. I know that there's something I was reading somewhere as well about that there's a potential that vaccines are correlated with allergies.
I don't know about that one personally.
Yeah, I don't know enough about it to talk about it, but
I do know, and again, like it makes sense to me because again, I don't think that the medical community also really discusses things well. I don't think that there's still this big barrier because if you look at it from like a layman's term, where like someone without a medical understanding or knowledge or even like a basic scientific background, it's very hard for them to understand what's going on when like a vaccine is administered. And I think that just for medicine with a bunch of different diseases, we could do so much better to actually communicate what's going on, be able to reassure people in so many better ways than just saying, especially with COVID, people are just like, oh no, you're right. Or I'm right, you're wrong. Like I have a degree, you don't, so like you should listen to me. And that shouldn't be the case. If you have that degree, you should be trying to relay that information to someone else without said degree so they can better understand. I mean, that's the whole purpose of science to begin with. So.
Yeah, I mean, it also goes back to the quote that your intelligence in the area is determined by how well you can explain it to someone who knows nothing about it. And you know, it was a very confusing time because like no one really knew who to trust. And I think the distrust in government and bureaucracy and all this has just increased drastically over the years, and I think it's higher now than ever because I think people are. It's confusing as even a civilian as we are to even understand like should we or should we not. I think you have more of an idea of like what it's like from the inside as you've kind of began to do some research, see how things work in the lab and like how the whole process is like. But yeah, I think it is a confusing thing to do when you don't know like okay, like most people have best interest in mind. They're trying to. I mean, vaccines are one of the greatest inventions of humanity that have helped us against these giant outbreaks like in the flu and COVID, etc.
I mean,
but at the same time,
we got rid of polio for sure.
Yeah.
So
it's a confusing place where I think hopefully with time we start to understand more about this whole area. But
yeah, and I mean that's the great part about science as well is that not only like do we continue to better understand things as we go on, but also has a way of like sorting itself out because. If let's say, I mean, with the Alzheimer's studies that have been redacted recently, I mean, this guy was saying that he had photoshopped Western blots basically, which just means that he had claimed that there was a protein there when it wasn't, which awful thing to do. And so, but what happened is because other people were, replicating his data, trying to better understand what was going on, like further push his study more, gain more knowledge about what was going on, and they weren't able to replicate it in their own studies, we were able to backtrack and see that, oh, this guy was lying about what he actually had in there, which I think is really cool that science has its own way of kind of working itself out just because of that peer review process and other people also just trying to replicate results, continue to better understand what's going on, and then just further expand upon other people's studies.
Right. You've been in science for a couple of years now, working full-time. I've read a lot about how there's a lot with funding in studies. It kind of gets into messy territory when you're trying to get funding for a study, you're trying to write government grants, and there's this money involved here, that money involved there. And because of that, I think a lot of people are starting to grow more distrustful of science, and maybe not the idea of science, but the scientific institution as a whole, right? That I've read about so many cases where Coca-Cola has funded studies. And it's no one's fault in particular, no one's evil, but it just so happens to be that people need money. Yeah. And unfortunately, science has not been like a particularly like super funded area as business and corporate world. And because of that, like as you've seen, I mean, from your perspective, like have you seen any of this at play, or like what is it like actually like from the inside?
So on our end, at least within the university setting, we have to discuss if there are any conflict of interest, especially when like we're publishing data, when we're getting our funding for at least the university setting. But I do know like there are so many cases where people that have been doing scientific studies, especially as you talked about for like Coca-Cola, Kellogg's, they are finding that, they were paid to basically say one thing or the other. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's why we had in the U.S., we were super anti-fat for so long in terms of it being in our food. And that's why all those like lean cuisines were fat-free. Yeah. And then we're finding out, how do you make a food that has no fat and it tastes good? You add a ton of sugar to it.
There you go.
And then all these companies were like, especially the sugar companies, they're like, say fat's the issue. Like, fat's the problem here. And then we're finding out, no, it's actually the sugar. But then for so many years, people were trying to, lose weight, get on that Weight Watchers. And then all of a sudden it's just like, this tastes great and there's no fat in it. incredible. It's like, oh yeah, it's got 20 grams of sugar in it. Of course it tastes great.
Yeah.
And then it's actually sugar that's really the problem. And then things shift entirely in the wrong direction, because then people are like, I'm going to cut sugar out of my entire diet. I'm just going to be, what is it, keto? Is that the one without any sugar in it? It's like, no, your body needs carbs. Your brain runs on glucose. That meme or whatever that I think it was like a TikTok noise or something. But yeah, our brain only can use carbohydrates from like sugars, simple sugars. I'm not saying like down like just raw sugar in your kitchen, but we do need to have like breads and whole wheats. We have to have glucose of some kind. So
yeah, I agree. I think as a society we give too much glory to diet as the end all be all for good health. I think that there's a lot of other things we should pay attention to, just because even if you think about our history as a species, for the 100,000 years we're hunter-gatherers, we didn't get like these fine cuisine. We didn't like, no hunter-gatherers saying, okay, I'm gonna go on my ketogenic diet now. I'm gonna go my no sugar diet. Oh, that chicken breast has fat in it. I'm not gonna eat that. Like, they had very limited access for food, and they were still able to survive for a long period of time, and they were pretty healthy from what we understand. Obviously, their life expectancy wasn't as high because of infection and other causes as well, with access to food as well. But I think that the degree to which we attribute good health to diet, as in like, it's about the carnivore versus the ketogenic, or it's this diet or that specific food, or the fat in that or the sugar in that. I just think that we overthink that too much, and I think there's such an abundance of food now that I think people are just making a lot of money off of making noise about this diet and that diet. And I think that I went through like this phase of reading a lot about like just health related things in general, and I did see about the demonization of sugar as a problem as well. I just think that what it all comes down to, although it seems so convoluted and confusing the way I think society's made it out to be, I think it's as simple as just eat anything that's whole. Just eat a whole food, and that's it. And that's kind of been my approach to it.
Stick away from like the processed stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I'm thinking about this meme now, and it was the is this ham processed? I don't want it if it's not processed. And they just go in depth about how it's just like this is a whole pig that has just been ground down into a slab of beef or slab of pork. And it's like, no, this is absolutely processed. I'm just thinking about that meme right now. Yeah, sticking away from like the processed stuff, trying to stay within a healthy diet is really all that people need to try and do. And then obviously exercise as well. I mean, calories in, calories out, just focusing on that side to at least like maintain a healthy weight that one individual wants, but also what defines the healthy weight, because BMI is incredibly incorrect. So
yeah, that's true as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, the health, I hope that America can kind of wake up to this stuff. I think people are definitely waking up to it, and more people I talk to know about this kind of stuff. And I know we're very obese these days, but I think we're moving toward a better direction.
Yeah, and like for me, I have no problem with individuals living the life that they want to live. I just think that it's very important to recognize that there are long-term health complications for lifestyles, for example. Like if someone is chronically overweight for long periods of time, there are going to be extra stressors on your joints. It's going to be a lot harder for you to be mobile. There's all these other health complications too, especially with your heart. And a lot of people just either aren't aware of it, or in the moment they don't care. And I think that we have to have a fine line, or at least a balance, into understanding that we can't be telling other people how to live their lives, because it's their life. Like if you want to eat ice cream every single day, by all means, like do that. I have no problem with it, as long as, and even then, like, yeah, go for it, even if you don't know the long-term consequences of it. I just do wish that those consequences were better understood for people, because I know that a lot of people do change their perspectives. Like there's like, especially in like the influencer sphere for individuals that are heavier set, when they're younger they are like very accepting and like very pushing that idea, but then as they get older seems to be like a shift where people are like, oh, like I'm having all these adverse health complications now because of the lifestyle I lived previously, and they're trying to fix it, but at that point it's a lot harder to, right? So
yeah, I think that gets into some difficult territory, because I agree. I think you can decide for yourself what you want to do with your life. I think that's the whole idea of this country as a whole. And I also think that it gets into some kind of dangerous territory when you're like, okay, but you should be aware of like what this is actually doing to you. Because I think there's also a culture now where it's like it's okay to be obese, and it's like you can still be accepted into society, and people can still treat you nice, and it's like a good thing. And I think a lot of people go take it too far. We're like, this is a great thing for me. And I think that awareness piece is important. That okay, you can do what you want, but you should also know like what you're doing to yourself and like what the implications of this can be down the road.
Yeah, but I think we also just have to have better metrics for it as well, because I mean I'm obese.
Yeah,
by the BMI standards. Yeah, technically I am obese, and I'm absolutely not by like what a physician would call obese. And I think that we just have to have a better way of actually like monitoring that to an extent. But again, that's well above my pay grade. That's something for individuals within the health field to actually figure out.
Yeah, fair enough. And maybe obesity, I think obesity is just like a good indicator of the real thing, which is, are you metabolically unhealthy? I think that's what we should be looking at. Like, are you metabolically unhealthy? And I think that's like the metric we should really be studying. But even if we look at that, I think the stats are pretty clear about where we are as a society. And I don't think we should use BMI as an indicator of where we're as a society, but I think there's other ways we can kind of look at that and see that, you know, we are in a place now where I think some kind of intervention is needed. And I think my big question is, should it be institutional intervention, or should it be like a cultural intervention?
When you say institutional versus cultural, like what would be an example of both?
Should we be changing something at the government level? As in, like, should we make laws about how companies are allowed to create food in America? Should we do something at the institutional level, at the legal level? Or should we, something like, for example, the growth of the culture of fitness in America has been a cultural thing. It's not been institutionalized. It's like TikTok and people saying gym is cool, and it's grown as a culture in America. And like that, I think anytime there's change, it's either cultural or it's like institutional or a mix of both. And I just don't know, like, what with this one, would making laws and regulations around this be the big help? Would that help us a lot? And is that even possible? But like, how do we move in the right direction?
I don't know. I'm still very much just in the mindset that we want people to be able to live their life. So I don't want there to be like a rule where, oh, if you're overweight by this amount, then you don't get to experience life as the same way that other people would, by like an actual law or something like that. I think that's un-American, really, because like, again, like, you have the right to pursue the life that you want to live here. I will say, if anything, because that there are long-term health complications when you are obese for long periods of time. And the only issues that we have with it is that sometimes the medical field itself can't take on the responsibility of a large amount of these, especially like the free healthcare systems that we have with the government. Sometimes we aren't able to actually take on and provide for everyone that has these issues, because it is taking away from other characteristics or other individuals where it's, you know, they've lived a healthy life, they've done what they could, and then it finds out that they've had a heart complication or other disease or disorder that was out of their control. But then, well, there's not as many resources that they can take away from it, because all of these resources are going to individuals that did not try and lead a healthy life. So I think the only thing that we could do is, if there is not enough resources in terms of the healthcare population actually being able to provide services, that would be the only thing where I would say, like, if someone has been chronically overweight for a long time and they made no steps to try and fix it within their life, I think that if you, like, there were health resources that were limited because of that, I think that would be the only thing where you could maybe try and say, like, we can't give you the care. This is something you have to, your insurance company needs to pay out, or this is something that, like, you have to pay out.
When I was thinking about the institutionalized, I was thinking less about on the individual, but more like the companies that create these products. Like, for example, I think a lot of countries now have rules that there's like a long list of ingredients and you cannot put these ingredients in your food. I think a lot of European countries have adopted that too, but America is like the most open in a way where Fruit Loops can put whatever they want in Fruit Loops, as an example. And I think another thing about institutionalized is that even marketing way, because I think, for example, the most unhealthy foods are marketed to children. Like, with the example of Fruit Loops, for example, we have like these parrots and things dancing, and we're kind of associating something that's fun and joyful and for kids with something that's absolutely terrible. And even if this is a small thing, is changing the marketing of it, or even just removing an ingredient or two from it. You could still have the ideology you said of the more American ideology of that everyone can pursue their own life, because they can still have it if they choose to, but they're less inclined to and they're less likely to, and it's less associated. So I think that more like the level of like, what are these companies allowed to do? What are they allowed to put in their food? Or should we put like more harsh regulations that you cannot put this in your food, you can't put that in your food? And you can still make food that's unhealthy, that doesn't have all this laundry list of 100 different ingredients that we don't even know what's doing in your body. Like, we can come to a place where like, okay, added sugar is bad. We'll still have the unhealthy food, but it's nowhere near as is where it's right now, where it's free for all. Like, put whatever chemical this, spray that in your food. I think that if I was thinking institutionalized, it would be more at that level. But yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, we have that to an extent with like tobacco companies, right? Where, they have to say that XYZ compound within cigarettes is what causes these long-term health complications. So maybe, because I don't necessarily think that you should have to do away with it and they shouldn't be allowed to put that in there, but I think that they should be transparent with what's actually going in there, what it's doing, if it is known, and if it's not known, then have some type of warning on it and say that we don't really know the long-term health complications from it. But yeah, I'm very much against like the idea of like, oh, you can't put everything in there because we still don't know if something's bad or not, right?
Do you think they should still be allowed to if they wanted to put something in there?
I think, again, as long as like they're being upfront and transparent about the actual effects of a lot of these reagents that are going into food these days, I would say so. Yeah.
Interesting. What are your thoughts? We talked earlier about like the scientific community and kind of your perspective inside of it. What do you think about as a whole at like a bigger scale as it relates to some of these food companies? Like, there's so many examples of like funding in the scientific industry and studies related to products such as, is sugar bad for you or not? Is Coca-Cola bad for you or not? What are your thoughts like the whole like system around it? Like, do you think that there's hope for us to improve that system at all, or?
I just hope that if anything, you would just have scientists that are trying to be good scientists, do good research, not just publish a finding because Coca-Cola wants to find XYZ as a factor for obesity and not whatever they're putting in it, right? Mm-hmm. So for me, I would just hope that scientists do good science, but that is hard to do. And it sucks because, again, like if you have a lab in your lab setting and you're being offered millions of dollars where you can be funded for years to come to just lie about some data. Mm-hmm. And from my perspective, I would never, but I do know that that could be a very tempting thing for some PIs. And I don't know, I just think what's really nice right now is that all data is becoming publicly available. And so for one of my papers that we published, everything is in an online database. Anyone can access that. Anyone can see the data that our lab worked with, what we did, and can move forward with that. So like if they wanted to go back and double check what we did, it's there. So I think making it that like the standard, I think is really important, because then we can always see what's going on. We can always see what type of analysis was done, what the data actually says.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that's grown a lot more in the last couple of decades too. So it's kind of been a big shift recently. And I don't know, what do you have knowledge about like the difference between like the communities in like the 90s to like now? Like, has that, if that's helped at all?
Oh, yeah, it's definitely like a really good thing, because I don't know if it's like, because the thing is, it's not going to, you won't hear about the stories of it like preventing something because people won't be like doing their data wrong now, right? So I will say, this really became a big thing after the Alzheimer's papers were, I think that was in like 2020, 2021, when they found out that those bands had been photoshopped within the results, which is just horrible again. Mm-hmm. So that's when everything's been more public. So only within the last 2 years. But again, we're not going to see like the good benefits from it, because people that are doing the good science, and no one's going to put fake data now online and say, oh yeah, like this is real data now, because we can double check their work now, mm-hmm. which is nice.
Yeah, that's huge, dude. And I wonder like what other ways that we can promote good scientists, because I think that the internet has opened that as a huge opportunity, especially like with through influencers and things like that. That there's more like spaces for at least good scientists who care to be able to share their knowledge, like whether through books and through podcasts is a great example. And there's just so much more of a wealth of knowledge people can access with the internet. Beyond that, like, do you think what other steps we can take to promote good scientists that are out there that people that are maybe more unknown?
I think that we just want to like, there needs to be a shift within the scientific perspective. I know with some of the undergrads that I work with, when they're working on a project and the p-value is not significant, they're like, it's not good, like this isn't like good data. It's like, no, this is still good data. We know that it's not this pathway, for example. Like, we're not going to pour any more resources there. So, but for a lot of scientists and PIs, they want the big headliner paper. They want something that goes into Cell or Nature, and they want to be like front and center on it. And so to do that, you have to have p-values that are significant, and you have to have research that has a significant reach and a significant scope in terms of what it's going to do. And so that's what PIs want, and they really try and push for that, whether that means overworking graduate students or making sure that they will put pressure in terms of like, like this data, like how's this data looking? And so I think people that do falsify information are doing it because of a pressure, an external pressure. So removing that pressure. Huh?
No one's evil.
No, well, yeah. I wouldn't say so, no. But I think that everyone is just like, there's always like an outside factor that's causing them to not do what they would want to necessarily do conscious-wise. Yeah. So, yeah, I just think removing that pressure, especially within an academic setting, because again, it's just so competitive, getting grants, getting PI positions, being able to publish, everything is so difficult. Maybe somehow removing that competitive aspect, but I don't know how you'd be able to do that besides increasing funding and trying to divert resources from like our taxes into more research-based institutions or resources.
Yeah, I mean, I could empathize with someone in that position because I can just imagine an example of, let's say there's Bob and he's always been passionate about the ocean, and he, through high school, through college, he finally gets a position in a lab, and he's hard to work, he's doing research he loves, and it just so happens that his p-value is not significant enough, and then it's like, all right, well, let's see, what do I do here? My PI has been asking in kind of this indirect way, like, how's the data going? Like, do we have something good here? And I know that I'm only here to promote good data. I'm only here to kind of share knowledge about the community, but I'm kind of in a difficult position now. I kind of want to have a voice. So for now, let me just like move some of these numbers around here and there and kind of make it the way out. This is actually what we have, and PI's happy. And she might know what's happening in the background. He might not know. But nobody knows anything. But I can understand how, in a certain scenario, people with good intentions can still do the wrong thing, which can, if it's that common, then it could lead to huge problems at a scale level about general knowledge. So I guess my other question is, how common really is it? And when I say that, I guess the cases of everything is fraud, where we have that one Alzheimer's paper where everything was fake, the images are photoshopped, and that was maybe even more of a malicious intent or whatever intent, versus even small like numbers, zeros and ones moving around here in the background nobody knows about, just so I can make my PI happy. Like, how, in both of those cases, like, how common really is it?
I don't think it's that common, but that's something that we wouldn't really know until the science continues to, work itself out. Like with the Alzheimer's paper, it was just people were trying to replicate that guy's results, and they just weren't able to get it to work. And then eventually that led someone to go back and look into that paper and then saw, I don't remember how they ended up actually figuring it out, but it was basically, once they found out that it was photoshopped, everything just made so much more sense. So I think long term, we don't, like, if this was happening on a large scale, at least in terms of like photoshopping, like the really big lies, we would know about it way more because there'd be so many more papers that are redacted. In terms of like the background, I can't really speak on that because with my own data, I don't futz any numbers, but I do know that like it could be very easy to, but I don't know. You just have to hope that people are doing good data.
Hope so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. How was your workout today?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah.
What did you hit?
I just had
legs. I know you squatted.
It was pull day today. Yeah.
You squatted too?
Well, I did a squat because one of our friends wanted to. He wasn't going up to 225 on the squats, and I was like, no, you definitely can. And then we got him to finally do it. So, but his stipulation for it was, okay, well then you need to do 225 and do it for pause squats. And I was like, that's fine, I can do that.
He made you do that?
Yeah.
Why?
I don't know. He wanted to he didn't want to be the only I really have no idea why he wanted me to do it, but we did. So.
Amazing, man. So when did you first start getting into lifting?
I was into it maybe back. I think I actually got into it and doing it well in 2021. Yeah, 2021, I would say, like the start of that new year.
Like right post-COVID, things are opening up again. And what got you into it? Was like friends going, or I know you did cross country for a while, right?
Yeah, I did cross country for a while, and it was just another way for me to be able to stay active without having to do the running, because running is, I don't know, it's difficult, and I don't really like it that much long term. I still do it very consistently, but I don't like it that much. Yeah,
I don't go on too many runs. I mean, if I were to do cardio, I think biking is more fun for me.
Yeah, and that's very fair. Yeah, for me, I'm just not. So when I started running, when I was a runner, I weighed 140 pounds.
Wow.
And I took off from COVID. I took that off, and I hadn't run for a year or so. And when I continued go into the gym and get a lot bigger, I wasn't running, so my body didn't naturally adapt to being able to carry around more weight. And now that I'm 50 pounds heavier than I was back then, I'm not very good at being able to run. My body is just screaming at the high impact of it. But so 2 miles is just about all I do nowadays. But it's slowly getting back up there and getting used to carrying around that extra weight, but it is a battle.
So how often do you run in a typical week now?
I go once or twice a week typically. I like to try and do it in my off days if I can.
Gotcha. Is there something specific you're training for in life right now, in fitness wise?
Nothing really. I just like being able to go to the gym and lift. It's a nice way to be able to de-stress, especially after a long day, or I do it at the very beginning of my day now, because I think it's a really nice way to start the day off. Start off on a good note with a good lift, and then everything else just kind of follows after.
Yeah, it's definitely fun to train in the mornings. I started doing that this last couple months too, and it's the first time I've really done it consistently in the morning lift. And it does set you up for a good day, but now it's damn, I don't want to stop doing that now, because now my day is just gonna not be as as great. But it's also a fun of looking forward to in the evening. But I mean, there's no perfect way to do it.
Yeah, I really again, we have a good group of guys in the morning, so it's always fun to just be there with them. Yeah. And I think that's a big drawing point for me, actually waking up early and going. I think that's why that's been a big shift for me, because I think I was going closer to 9, and now all our friends are there 7, so I go at 7 now. But I used to do it in the afternoon, but then I'd have to wait so much longer for equipment, especially if I went 6
It's busy,
PM.
bro. Yeah.
Yeah, very busy. And so now where I'm okay. And so I wouldn't want to do it, because I want specific machines, and I want to be able to I don't want to wait. Mm-hmm. And so I would push it back into 7 or 8 o'clock at night, but then I can't take pre-workout because I wouldn't be able to fall asleep. So I just like the morning stuff better.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Is that where you met all these guys?
Yeah.
Palmer, morning?
Mm-hmm. Yep, good old Palmer. Yeah, we love the tent. We love the tent.
Yeah, it's a great place, man. On the topic of all of these neurological diseases, I know something we were talking about in the gym once was about your personal experiences with, I guess we can also classify it as some kind of neurological issue, but with addiction. So if you're willing, would you be willing to tell the story of your experiences with drug usage in the past or addiction, if only if you're willing, and kind of what you've learned about through that process?
Yeah, well, I was never addicted to any hard drug substances. I just smoked cigarettes in high school. Yeah. And for me, I don't remember why I even started it. I think it was just because it was cool or something, and I was just oh yeah, smoking cigarettes in high school. And eventually I just started to do it more and more, and I think got to the point where I realized that I had a problem. And it was, I think, when I was getting close to a pack a day. I wasn't at a full pack, but it was okay, this is a lot, and a lot of my money was going into it as well, so I just did not want to continue to feed that habit. And so I just kind of quit cold turkey, or tried to. So it was a hard process in terms of actually getting myself to do it, but I know that I wasn't very far in the line of actual addiction to make it an issue. I think I only smoked for about 1.5 to 2 years. So.
So from the first day you did it, sometime in high school, how long did it take you to get from beginning of doing it to almost a pack a day?
Probably within that like 1.5 to 2 year period.
Okay.
Yeah, because it was like when I was actively like doing that where I was like, okay, this is a problem.
Yeah, that's when you realized.
Understood.
I think that quitting cold turkey, although it sounds, when people are thinking about addiction and they think about from maybe an external perspective, they think it's a lot easier than it actually is. But I think the action of actually going cold turkey, that going from the prevalence of the amount you're doing it to nothing, I'd imagine it'd be a lot harder than just, I just quit cold turkey. So what was that process like?
So I tried to quit cold turkey is what it really was, but that obviously didn't work out. So for me, I would still smoke occasionally, and for me, like nicotine gum was something that I used a lot just because it was something that wasn't cigarettes. And I think it was because I started smoking, I think, like my freshman year, and then did that long term, a lot in secret mostly. And then eventually got to the point where I had stopped smoking, or at least like was done with it when I went to college. So.
Got it.
Yeah, so about 2 years of actually like doing it, smoking a lot, and then getting off of it like over that period of actually like graduation. And it was always, I don't know, in my mindset, it wasn't that I compare it to like right now where like I get off of work and it's like, oh, like a beer just sounds really nice right now. And it would be like, I was like looking forward to that. And so for me in high school, it was like, oh, a cigarette sounds really nice right now. Like I want one right now. And that was more of the mindset in terms of like the addiction itself.
Yeah,
and
the connections in your brain.
Yeah, it's just, it wasn't that like, again, it's just like the idea of like, oh, life would be so much better right now if I just had a cigarette in my hand. So. Yeah,
and now you feel like it's totally gone, or does it come back every now and then?
There, like, occasion when like I get really stressed, I'll like smoke occasionally. I don't do it very often now. I think the last time I did it, my grandmother was in the hospital for a heart surgery, and I ended up like going and then just like chain smoking outside in like a smoking area for an hour or so while she was under. But
yeah. But that was like a one-time instance, and after that it was like,
I mean, that was like within this last summer, so
right.
Not that long ago. And but besides that, like again, I don't really smoke that often.
Got it.
Yeah, I mean that was the first one in within like 2 years or so. So.
Got it.
Yeah.
I know that this is going to be dependent upon the location as well, but what do you think about, you were in high school, how many years ago?
Graduated in 2016.
2016,
so, yeah.
Right. So freshman year is like 2012, right? Would you say there's a cultural difference now and then regarding it? Or?
I mean, probably, but I think if anything, it's just shifted to vapes now. I know vapes are like a very common thing, but I mean, as you talked about with like the Fruit Loops and like marketing to kids, I mean, that's what the vapes do. So, yeah.
That's a problem. What do you think about that?
I mean, that's just anything like marketed specifically to a child audience that is purposely harmful. We could say whatever we want about like the Kellogg cereals, where it's like we don't really know about the long-term health effects of it. Sure, we could argue that. But like for tobacco itself, we do know that there are long-term health complications there and addiction as well. And we're still very much just saying, yeah, like, I mean, if you see any of the flavors that they have, it's just like, what is it, like blue raspberry or like
bubblegum.
Yeah, exactly. So like, yeah, it's very much just targeted for these kids because it's just, yeah. And I remember like when was this? It was something with like, when I was like 16 or something with like drinking specifically, and I saw this like beer that was like, it was supposed to be like a blue raspberry. It was maybe not beer, it might have been like a liquor, but it was like a blue raspberry or something. I was like, oh my god, that looks great. I want to try that when I'm like older. And maybe I did end up trying that later. I don't remember. But again, it was just like marketed towards me, and that was something where like little me saw that and was like, yeah, I want to try that.
So it's kind of building even if you don't have access to it, it's like building the desire early on. Mm-hmm. It's like something about the child mind that it's when you're in that state of extreme neuroplasticity, then it kind of gets added to that wiring where it's something that you associate as like a good thing, and it's even harder to break that later on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's a problem with anything associated with kids. Like I've read about this in a positive and a negative way, that when you're trying to like teach someone to change, right? I think I was talking about this with Andrew Pan, that he says that he doesn't have much hope for the general population to get into health and fitness, although there's a subset that can. That I guess we're kind of blindsided because we see them all the time. But if you look at the general population, he doesn't have much hope for them. But he said that he has a lot of hope for the next generation of people if we can like brainwash the kids into it. And I think kids are much better at picking up like these different mindset things that kind of sit in their brain and they kind of live there. Like if something is if a kid understands something when he's like 5, 10 years old, like he'll probably understand that for a good amount of his life. And I think that way the targeting the kids in anything, whether it's the Kellogg cereal, the blueberry gum liquor, or the vapes now, I think that's where the company is trying to get most of their profit from. But I don't know, man. I'm just like worried about the implications of that down the road. And then there's also like social media and stuff that it's going to be harder to break that addiction later on too. So
yeah, I mean, you get someone addicted at 16, 18 years old, you have a very viable and a very loyal customer for the rest of their life. So that's why they market to the kids, right? It's not because that they want kids to be having their product. It's that they want a loyal customer that's going to get addicted. And the sooner you get someone addicted, the longer that they're going to be a customer for you. So yeah, I think that's like a big target audience with like the vapes right now, and like especially like high schoolers, college kids. Like, I mean, you see vapes everywhere. You see people like you go out downtown to a bar or something.
You'll see it.
You're gonna see vapes. Yeah.
Yeah, it's gotten so popular now too. I didn't realize how popular they were till like this year.
Yeah, I think being on like a college campus, you can definitely just like see how many there are just out and about. Yeah.
Do we know anything about how comparing vapes to cigarettes in terms of their health impacts?
I mean, they're supposed to be healthier, right?
By what metric? Like,
there's just no tar going into your lungs, I guess. But
okay.
I don't know the comparison between the two. I know that e-cigarettes really took off because they were supposed to be healthier for you. But then I'm sure that there's health complications with them. I mean, nicotine itself has health complications. Right. So, yeah. The specifics of which, like the comparisons between vaping and cigarettes, I don't understand myself because I just haven't looked into that research. Mm-hmm. It's not something that I feel the need to, like, go back down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, I mean, they're both bad. Stay away from both is that kind of the mindset.
Yeah, I would assume. And either way, like, I mean, there was one person that I knew that would be... And I can't really chat shit because I love caffeine, but like there was someone that would wake up and they would immediately take 2 hits of their vape, crack open a Celsius, start drinking their Celsius, get about halfway through it as they're scrolling their phone on TikTok and looking at like whatever they had for there. They'd get up and then they would go and journal, and they journal 3 pages, which I just think is like, what a wild... Like, oh, you're really in that mindful demure era, I suppose. And then they're gonna journal their 3 pages first thing when they wake up, while they finish their Celsius, still hitting their vape pen, and then go out and do their day. I was like,
that's such a bad way to start your day, man.
I get not in terms of like judging, like you live your own life, right? But like
that's extreme, man.
That's just a little. I just think that it's really wild that like you get all that caffeine in your system, you like do all this. And then you go and do this mindfulness exercise. I think that's funny.
Oh my god. Okay, we're good. Yeah, I mean, I've heard like similar kind of things before where it's like people will get so caught up about this diet versus that diet, and then they'll go do a habit that's like 10 times worse. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, dude, the whole like, when you talk about caffeine with yourself, like what form of caffeine do you mainly take? Is it just pre-workout or?
It's mostly pre-workout. So I think like my daily intake is about 400 milligrams a day. It is milligrams. Grams would probably kill me. But yeah, so like I'll just take my pre-workout in the morning, and that's got 180 in it. And then I do that before going to the gym and like on the way there. And then usually in the afternoon I get tired, and so I'll
like 2 p.m., 3 p.m.
2 p.m. rolls around and I'm just,
same here,
tired, want to keep working. So then I'll have like a Celsius or a coffee at that point. And so mostly like my highest daily intake is like 500 if I really want another coffee later on in the evening, or if I want a Celsius earlier in the day, but usually nothing more than that.
How long have you been doing this for?
2 years now, probably, I would say. Yeah.
I don't know too much about the impacts of caffeine personally. I know caffeine itself is not terrible, but I'm not sure with certain dosages and things like that. Have you got into like the literature or research about like caffeine impact?
I mean, a good daily dose is 400 milligrams a day. So anything more than that isn't great for you.
What does it do to you if you take too much?
It starts to just put strain on your heart. Yeah, it's just not good for your heart, basically. You know, and anxiety as well. I mean, the more caffeine that you have, usually individuals get more anxious with it as well. So,
have you ever taken a break for like a couple of days or a week?
A little tea break from caffeine.
Have you ever done that?
I've tried.
What is that like?
Difficult, because then I just get tired and I just really want one. Again, it's the idea where it's like, oh, my life would be so much better now with the Celsius in my hand. Right. And for me, especially with like if I'm analyzing data or working at my computer at my desk and not actively doing a project or an experiment, I will find myself
wanting to sip.
Just wanting to sip something. And I don't know if that's like, for me, I just want to find something I can substitute in there instead of caffeine or instead of a Celsius, and I think that would be great.
Do you have ideas?
I've tried water, and it's just like, I don't know, I want something that has like more kick to it, I guess. So if I can make my coffees last a little bit longer, that might help too, but yeah.
All right, well, I wish you luck, man. Hopefully you find something that can help you with that, but...
Yeah, we'll get there eventually. maybe juice.
Yeah, hey, maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah. With all the research you're doing now, do you ever think about where you'll be like 10 years from now? Like what, right now you're kind of working in this lab, you're focusing research on a very specific area. Do you have any dreams of like either A, like research you really want to do and really want to study, or B, like a life in terms of career that you really want to live? Like have you thought that far ahead, or are you kind of taking one step at a time?
Absolutely. Well, I kind of touched on it earlier. Like I'm in the middle of like medical school applications, had an interview with U of M last week. So, I mean, fingers crossed there. But like, for me, my goal and like the process where I want to be, I want to work within academic medicine. So I want to be working at a university hospital, treating patients, doing research, and also teaching. So with my research right now, like I am really involved in neurodevelopmental disorders. I would love to work with that population within a clinical setting long term. So neurology, pediatrics, and helping patients throughout their lifetime with these developmental disorders. And then I also want to be doing the research that I'm currently doing right now, further expanding upon that, trying to find if there are any therapeutic approaches that we can do, which there is some of the research that I want to do, we can talk about like in a little bit as well. So, but still being able to do that, and then also actually having a teaching aspect as well. Like you find out in the sciences that your experience is really shaped by the mentors that you have, and like everything that we have within like human tradition and knowledge has been passed down, right, in one way or another, through mentorship or through books, research, whatever. And so I would love to take on that mentorship role, be able to continue to provide education for other individuals, especially within the academic setting. So I think the greatest accomplishment that I could have as a physician would be to help to educate the next generation of physicians to be knowledgeable, empathetic physicians, and to go on and have a like tenfold increase in terms of like what I'm able to do on my own, right?
Yeah, that sounds great, man. And then when you think about your life like outside of your career as well, let's just say like what's your dream life?
I haven't really thought about that one as much, I'll say. I think at some point I would like to be able to, like, I love Ann Arbor. I'd love to be here long term, so would love to stay here, own a house at some point if the economy ever fixes itself. And I mean, besides that, I mean, I just want to be surrounded by individuals that are also creatively minded or like, you know, inquisitive, want to like have conversations about things, be able to like learn and continue to develop as a person. And yeah, just continue along the lines of like always learning. I don't know. That's like a big thing for me. Yeah.
Yeah. And does that focus mainly in the subject areas you're interested in, or even just learning in general?
Just learning in general. I mean, there's so many like cool things out there. One of the like more recent rabbit holes I went down was attachment theory, because I just think that
I've read about that. It's cool. We talked about it a little bit earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me what you learned.
I think it's, well, one of my friends went through a breakup recently, and we had dated like the same insecure attachment person. And it's just crazy, like, oh my God, did we
So again,
we both dated the same, like, insecurely, well, not the same person.
Oh, okay.
But, like, they had the same attachment style.
Oh, okay. I think I said the same person.
Yeah. But the funny thing is that, like, because they had this similar attachment styles, we got the same exact script.
I think before we let's first like define what that means, right? So I guess attachment style is your way of like dating or your way of connecting with people.
Yeah.
How about you define that first? Yeah.
Yeah, you can apply that within like a dating context, and it's a little bit easier, but it's within like your everyday life as well.
Okay.
And so the four main ones that they have is there's the secure one, which is just like, you know, you're secure in who you are and like your identity.
You're not anxious at all. Like you're kind of, there's more trust and comfortability.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you have the insecure. All the other ones are insecure. And you have the anxious attachment, which is someone that like you get your partner and you want to spend every waking moment with them, and you're always just like on high alert.
Like what are they up to right now? What are they doing?
Exactly. Yeah. And those are the people that are, you know, checking other people's phones with like, oh, they're gone, like time to go through their phone, see if they're cheating.
Yeah.
Those are the anxious attachments.
You always have that fear in the background, like what if?
Exactly. And then you have the avoidance, which are the ones that avoid the connection as much as possible. And so you have like the two main ones are the dismissive avoidance, and then I don't remember if the term is now fearful or anxious avoider anymore. I think it's fearful avoidant.
Can you define those?
So yeah, so the dismissive avoidant is someone that's like not very in touch with their emotions in general. And so they're the kids that were never really allowed to express emotion as they're growing up. It's like, oh, and it's a male dominated field, for no pun intended. But it is like the guys where it's like, oh, like the sons that were always like having to help emotionally regulate their mothers, or like told that you can't express emotion. And so that's like dismissive avoidance are very common in men.
What do you think about that, like men's and emotion, before we keep going?
I mean, there's a healthy way to do it, as there is in any capacity. And I mean, there are really overly emotional. I don't like to assign like gender norms to it, because I mean, you have like one side of it where it's like, oh, it's not okay for men to show emotion of any kind, but I think that you definitely have to. And it's really important to be in touch with your emotions, but in an extent that you actually like regulate them, that you can like not only self-regulate, but also be able to co-regulate with a partner.
I agree with that. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And yeah, the dismissive avoidance want to just self-regulate entirely. And if you try and like for example, like if there's like someone that's bothering them, they're just going to like go off on their own and like try and fix it themselves, and will not like accept a partner's help for that.
If there's a problem, they kind of like want to wait for the problem too, in a way.
Avoid it. Yeah, exactly. And then the other one is the fearful avoidant, and they're the ones that will always, they're both. And so they want the closeness of the relationship, and then like they'll like run into their partner until their like trust is broken, or their perceived trust is broken, and then they just become fully dismissive. And so they have both actions of anxious and anxious attacher and avoidant attacher, and it just depends on the setting that they're in.
Got it. Wow. I think it's so primarily these attachment styles are developed through the way you're raised, right?
Yeah, it's just like how your parental upbringing is. For I can't remember what it is for the anxious one.
I think it's more that if there's probably more, I know if it makes sense for the secure one, that like if your parents are in a loving, secure relationship, then like you'll develop a secure attachment style. I think for avoidance makes sense, like if your parents are always never there for you in a way, like you're kind of left to doing things on your own maybe.
Yeah, like there's that sense to it. The main difference between at least the two avoidance that they have, like with the dismissive, it's just like you're kind of like on your own to an extent, but fearful avoidance is really sad because it's just kids that are usually abused. And I mean, that's what my experience was, which is, well, not for me, but for like the partner that I had. And it was like very sad to like hear the stories that she had and just recognize. I mean, at the time when I was dating, I didn't understand like anything attachment style related, and now it's just like, oh, like this is entirely out of your hands, but it's so sad. Yeah.
And then probably the anxious one is more maybe that there's like a tension in the relationship with their parents, maybe, where there's like more conflict.
Yeah, it is something where it's like it was like inconsistent attention. That's what it was. And
inconsistent attention.
Yep. And so you had to be like aware of like when you would actually like get the attention that you wanted, right?
Gotcha.
I think that's what that was.
Cool.
Yeah.
So yeah, you mentioned your partner you dated who had a very specific attachment style that maybe made it difficult for you at the time when you didn't understand what this meant, and then with time you started to understand it. I think for most people, as I start to understand what this means and maybe can see patterns based on what we just said in their own childhood upbringing and see patterns in the way they've dated people in the past, is there hope for those people? Because I know that, again, with neurology, this is so baked into your upbringing and your childhood, which we've already touched on. It's so big, deeply inside somewhere that it's hard to untangle, unravel out, and break those, like, I mean, I think we all have, like, small stories you tell ourselves every, like, now and then, like, thought patterns that we see very commonly, either from traumatic events or even just, like, that's how brain is, and we can't explain why. And it's all, everyone's so different, but we can't really put it in words because it doesn't really make much sense. Yeah. But do those people have hope? And I know you mentioned co-regulation. Like, is there a way to fix it?
Yeah, therapy. I remember when my grandmother died. Like, my aunts have had a very, like, tough life. Now, my grandfather died very young, and my grandmother had to, like, raise the kids fully on their own. And there's, like, just a lot of, like, family trauma from that. I remember coming back from the funeral and then, like, talking about, like, what they were supposed to do with, like, all these emotions and all these things that were going on. And it's just a one-word answer. And it's just, like, therapy. You just go to therapy. The problem is, for so many people with these insecure attachment styles, is that the anxious ones want to go. And they'll go and they'll start to work on that. They'll unpack their childhood trauma, better understand it, find ways to regulate themselves instead of having to co-regulate all the time. The avoidance won't. The avoidance don't think that they have a problem. They just think that they're going to avoid it, they're going to run away when the relationship gets too close, or they, for me, it was always a pattern of like what actually ended up like causing our breakup was I spent 5 days with her in a row, and because we were on a trip. And for that, it's just like, that would be like a perfectly normal thing within a normal relationship. But then for her, like, we were in the same room together the entire time, so she'd never had her chance to get her own space. And so then that just led to, like, all these issues because she wasn't able to self-regulate herself anymore, like, just take her own space and be on her own. And so, yeah.
What are some of those issues that you kind of saw manifest, if you're willing to share?
Oh, it was just like, she just, like, didn't want to be around me at all. And I'm just like, I haven't done anything wrong. I've just been present. And, like, that's the thing, too.
Right.
And that's a huge factor for, like, a lot of people when they are dating, is to recognize that it's not something you're doing most of the time. It's usually, like, how someone else is responding to an event that is out of their own control, especially, like, from their childhood or their own trauma.
So I guess there are ways therapy could help break those mental things. And you're saying that, okay, let's say there's someone in a situation like that avoidance attachment style. Their solution could be that maybe they just need time to themselves on a regular basis so they can self-regulate.
Yes and no, because that doesn't get to the heart of the issue.
Right? So it's always there. You're just kind of coping with it.
Yeah, if anything, you're just self-reinforcing said behavior of avoidance, if anything, because you'll have anxiety build as you're close to your partner. And then as your anxiety builds over a period of time, and then all of a sudden, like, you need to, like, break it off. So, like, you need to, like, end it. And this happens a lot with, like, individuals, whether that means, like, taking space to yourself and not responding for weeks on end, or just breaking up with them entirely. When they do that, they get their space, and then they feel so much better because they don't have to worry about the relationship anymore. So then they're just like, oh my God, this is great. They'll go through this, like, period of, like, an existential high, where they're just so happy. They'll be posting online all the time. It's great for them. They're so happy. They're like, oh, I didn't need that relationship. It was the relationship's problem because they're outside of that. They've gotten their space. Whether that be from, breaking up with someone or, like, actively just, like, taking that space to self-regulate themselves. But then it just, again, feeds into that habit. The brain gets used to it. It's like, oh, I want space. When really what it wants is to, you need to be able to recognize why you're scared of being with your partner within this setting, right? Like, why are you anxious here when there's not an actual, like, reason for it besides commitment fears? So. Wow.
Okay. Exploring, like, something that I've noticed, like, in myself. I think that for the most part, I had a pretty good childhood upbringing, and I would imagine that I have a secure attachment style from what I know about myself, and obviously I'm learning more about it, but I think I'm a secure attachment style. That makes sense to me. My parents were always there for me when I was growing up. They always had a loving relationship. That was never a problem. But like at the same time, like I can't imagine spending time with someone like all day for 5 days. Like I feel like for me, I like having time to myself for like at least 1 to 3 hours a day, like a block. Like okay, the gym I'm usually talking to people in the gym now, but like at least like a place where I can just go to and like I can be away from people for a little bit. And I guess like even whether it's a family road trip or it's like spending time with my friend a lot who came and stayed with me or anything like that, I'd always like having at least an hour or two where I can just get away for a little bit just because like it's more relaxing. And maybe that comes from somewhere else where I'm trying to be someone around that kind of person maybe, or it's like I like to be around other people. I love talking to people, but I also like having an hour or two to myself. Yeah. I wonder, is that something similar to this, or is it different, or what do you think about that?
I mean, no, that's very normal, and like that's perfectly fine. It's just for like that situation specifically, we were still doing that.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I remember there was like one day where I'm just like, I literally just do my entire like bit on my own, and it didn't help at all.
Did you hold what on your own?
So I wasn't even like around her an entire day.
Yeah, so you kind of went and did your own thing.
Yeah, I did my own thing.
And that didn't help.
Yep, and it didn't even help because again, it was more about like,
I see what you mean.
She had to have control of her own like space and setting and just like, yeah. So it's like, yeah, it is what it is. But again, it's just like, it's a very sad thing to recognize that this is all stuff that stemmed from like childhood trauma, having really bad experiences either within a parental setting, and it doesn't always even have to be parents. It could be something that happened within a school setting, but typically like the parental raising is like what's deemed as like the more common characteristic that we see.
Yeah.
But
you mentioned therapy. Have you ever tried it yourself?
Oh yeah, love therapy. Therapy's great. I mean, for me, after that breakup as well, like I was thinking, I've never had issues in relationships ever at any point. Like I've always been very secure. I've always like taken space to myself, had like a good healthy balance in my relationships. That one screwed me up because whenever she would take space, I wouldn't understand why she was taking it, and she never explained it either, and would just like be gone for days on end. And I was like, where did you go? And then she'd come back and she'd be like, oh my gosh, like, oh, and it's perfectly fine now, and never have any addressing for it. Mm-hmm. So you always like in those settings, when someone that's secure dates an avoidant, it will usually make you so much more anxious because you think that you're doing something wrong or there's something wrong going on within the relationship. And so afterwards with that, I did go back through therapy and like started working on like a lot more understanding of myself. But again, like it's great. I love therapy. I think therapy is a great thing for anyone to like work through and better understand patterns, at least within your own life, in your own settings, and then being able to help break that.
Do you like hammer?
Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
I think one of the reasons why neuroscience is so fascinating to me is like I think that with more introspection than I've done, just on my own, and just like trying to understand my mind better, you just start to notice like these little like things that just always come back, like these patterns or just like or like lines of thought, and some of them are so weird. It's like why does that always come back? Like I think I went on a walk a couple of days ago, and I remember that I noticed like this weird thing in my brain where it's like every now and then I'll get the feeling like I want people to know I'm doing well. And I don't like that at all. But like every now and then it'll come back where it's like I want people to know I'm doing well. And I think
well, do you mean like from a success standpoint or like okay, yeah. So not like I'm life. Doing okay mental wise, not
just like in life.
Yeah, like I'm successful.
That's not something I think about all day at all. But every like week or two, I'll notice myself do it. I'm like, wait, why did I just do that again? And I don't like that feeling a lot when I notice I did that. And it's like, I don't like doing that. But it's like, for example, I'll see someone I went to high school with, and maybe they'll see either a change in me or like some aspect of me that I'm doing well. And that I guess I realize that makes me feel good, that people know I'm doing well from a past life. But then I'll notice that I don't want to like approach life in that way.
Yeah.
And that's like a weird one where I haven't understood it fully yet. But I just think little things like that live in people's brains. And I think I can kind of know where it comes from like previous, I guess, trauma we could say, or like events. But I don't know. It's a weird one.
No, I mean, I think that's just like within human nature, right? Like there are so many, like we want to be successful. We want other people to know that we're doing well from so many different standpoints. You could say that in terms of like, evolutionarily speaking, to like find a mate, to find your partner. It could be from like wanting that, so like showing that you can handle yourself, being able to show that you are able to like provide. I mean, I think that's just like an evolutionary like thing for people to want to do. I think that it's always been something where, as a species, we've always wanted to show and know that we're doing well, right?
I guess so. That makes sense. Yeah, one of my friends. This is a little bit off topic, but it's related to mental disorders, so it's worth it. One of my friends has dyslexia. Do you know anything about dyslexia?
No, nothing particularly. No.
I know we were talking about Temple Grandin before, and we were talking about the whole conversation of like they get good on the thing instead. One thing I noticed in him, like we were actually talking about this morning, was he's sure he has dyslexia, but his memory is really good.
Mm-hmm.
As it, like you know that game where it's like you have the box on the screen, like 9 boxes on the screen, one will flash, click that one. One will flash, other one will flash.
Oh, it's like the pattern, yeah.
Yeah, he got to 41.
Oh wow.
And like that to me is really cool because like it just keeps it gives you more questions and answers. Like what, like how does this thing work? And like, okay, one person has this injury, they specialize in a different way. Like there's that one person who is a archer who I don't remember his name, but he doesn't have any hands.
Oh, I know, yeah.
And he learned to do it with his feet, and he has a whole skill set in his brain, that neuroplasticity that nobody has.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like just things like that. It goes back to that topic that, again, you mentioned there's no like evidence of it per se. That's how it works. But I just feel intuitively that it kind of makes like intuitive sense how something like that could work.
Yeah. Well, I think as well, like he didn't. So for that individual with the bow and arrow,
right.
It wasn't that like he was born without his arms and then all of a sudden just because like the brain was going to compensate, it was like, yeah, we can shoot arrows with our feet now. It's much more in the mindset that like the brain is so plastic that it's able to pick up new skills, right. And it's that way for anyone. Like I'm sure if we devoted a large amount of time to really any new tasks, especially when we're really young, we'd be able to form those new connections, be able to learn something so much faster. I mean, that's how it is with language, right? Mm-hmm. You have individuals that as soon as you start learning a language, the faster you're able to pick it up, the less of a dialect you'll have, and just like as a better speaker, just how much better you'll be. Yeah. So, and I think that just comes with like, I mean, you have that argument with, what's that boat? The philosophical argument about like the boat, where it's like, if you replace every piece of this boat, is it the same boat or not?
Okay, I've heard of that, yeah.
Yeah. And so people try and apply that to like the human body where it's like, oh, after 10 years, all your cells are entirely different. And that's not true because our neurons are, once you reach your developmental age of, 28 for men, 26 for females, whatever, when you're like fully matured at that level, the neurons that you have in your brain, at least like within the cortex area, those are the ones that you're stuck with the rest of your life. Okay. So you're not going to get any more of them. You may they're still able to like form new connections. You're still able to learn and have it's that synaptic plasticity that we keep talking about. But at least up there, like that's hardwired. So you're able to still learn new things, but it's just going to take a lot slower time because you're not actively creating new neurons throughout that process.
I didn't know that. That's cool.
Yeah. But the thing is too, we are still always creating new neurons just in the hippocampus. Okay. There's like 2 parts of the brain
that are a temporary storage space, hippocampus, or
yeah. Okay. Well, it helps with long-term storage. So basically, it's like in the process of being able to shunt memories and long-term information into the cortex where it's actually stored long-term. But so those neurons are always continuously made throughout our entire lifetime, and so I think that that's also really cool because there's this idea that like, oh, like you're fully developed at 26, 28, whatever the actual like age is. It's like, oh, like that's the person you're going to be. But that's not true because your brain is still creating new neurons to an extent. There's still so much potential there within people. It just isn't to the large amount that we had previously.
Yeah, that makes sense. Earlier talking about you were stressed out on the day your grandmother died. Did it have any impacts even like past that day? Like was it a difficult time for you at all, or?
Yeah, I mean it's a loss of family member is always difficult. For me, I really I tried to just be as supportive as I could to my family, especially during that period because of how difficult it was. And I wanted to just make sure that I was going to be able to do whatever I could to support them, especially my mother. Mm-hmm. So, like, I have a dog at home, or I don't have her right now. My mom has been taking care of the dog now for the last 3-4 months since my grandmother died. And it's just because, like, having that dog is very nice for her. Like, it's a great thing for her to be able to have, and so she loves having Mylan with her. So I've let her have the dog, and then when I've gone home, especially like during the funeral and the weddings, I know that I had to take on a little bit more of like a support system role and being there for my mom when things were getting tough. So
I see.
Yeah.
All right, Ty. It's been a great conversation. Been almost 2 hours. Touched on a variety of topics. I introduced this new thing on the last episode that we're gonna start doing, where we're gonna have you sign this big poster behind you, and from now onwards, I'm trying to get every guest to sign it.
Oh,
So
I like that.
in that black bag, I got a box of Sharpie markers. How about we go ahead and pick any spot on the whole sheet and
Sounds
sign your
great to
name
me.
and your number, 73. So, choose Sharpies.
Do I get to pick my own color?
Yeah, you have 9 options. They're all black.
Just like the policy, right?
Yeah. Let me get some more colors next in the future. But yeah, dude.
Where do I want to be? I don't want to be front and center. I feel like that's too much. But I kind of want to.
Hey, I mean, it's your pick.
I know. Oh, yeah, I shall. I shall. And that's like right dead center. Fuck yeah. Oh, I mean, like, last name's incredibly long.
How do you pronounce it? Let me try.
Hergenreder.
Hergenreder.
Yeah.
Reader. Okay.
Reader.
I wouldn't have said reader.
Yeah, most people do Hergenreder.
Yeah.
Yeah. 73.
Perfect. I like it. Right in the middle. Took the big
At
spot.
least it's visible. Usually my chicken scratch isn't. That helps.
Yeah. Do you ever think about the nature of time at all? Because I think that's something in my mind last night. It was weird. I was going to bed. Was it last night? Maybe the night before. I don't know. It was a weird night because I was going to bed and I was thinking about Thanksgiving break and I was just thinking about the specific moment, and then it kind of just hit me like I'll never be able to access that time of my life ever again. Like the exact same thoughts that were in my head, exactly what I was thinking, like that conversation I was in particular thinking about, like that's gone, and like where is it? And I don't know, like I think about time every now and then, but I think last night in particular I was thinking about it a lot more deeply. That time is so weird. And then I think I had this dream that same night. I was going to bed thinking about this. I had a dream that same night about like my childhood, and it was like extremely emotional. It was just like so weird when I woke up. But it's like I would describe it to how people describe like those psychedelic experiences, but obviously not to the same extent. But I was like, damn, like what the fuck just happened? Like I just like, but I don't know. I feel like time is so weird, and it doesn't scare me a lot, but sometimes it does. So I mean, do you ever think about it?
Yeah. Oh, I mean, time isn't real, right? I mean, technically, by that definition. I mean, time is a construct that we've made ourselves. We are the ones that like, the timekeeping part of it. But in and of itself, it is like an interesting thing to think about that we aren't going to be in this moment ever again, right? There's never going to be a point on December 8th at 4:44 in the afternoon that we're going to be within any space, right? There's never a do-over, which I think is both liberating and also horrifying at the same time, right? Like, the thing is, all these things that happen, they're in the past. So, like, if something bad happened at, 4:44 today, and it was just like, oh, like, this is awful. I'd never have to experience that again. But at the same time, too, there's just, like, so much potential because, like, this is, like, the only time that we'll ever have with it. So you want to do whatever you can, right? And at least I volunteered at a hospice facility for the last 3 years as well. And individuals, at least like within the end of their lifetime, at the end of their experience, no one ever really complains about something that they didn't do in terms of like, oh, I wish I had worked harder and gotten that promotion. Mm-hmm. I wish I had spent more time at work. I wish I had done X, Y, Z. It's always or I earned more money. Wish I'd gotten this paper published. It's always been about the connections that they've spent with people. So at the end of it, especially as you brought up with like your childhood, I'm assuming it was like something about like connection with other people, right? Yeah. So for those individuals,
actually, that's exactly the dream was about me and someone else. So.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just about like having that connection with someone, and for these individuals at the end of their life, that's the most important thing.
Wow.
the only time that I've ever heard people complain within this hospice setting, I mean, besides if they're like in pain, but it's usually about like, I wish I had made amends with that person. I wish I had done something else instead of like alienating my family. And when people are surrounded by like their loved ones, they are very content and they just reminisce on their life that they've lived within a very positive context. So
it's powerful stuff, man. I think that I like to give it meaning because it's more comforting, but then sometimes it just hits you like it's probably nothing. It's probably just randomness in this whole universe. And the reason I say that is because like the more like you, I guess, read about stuff and learn, the more you kind of realize that it's. I think one particular example in particular, like I was watching this podcast about how our brain is kind of designed like these fire alarms, right? So fire alarms or any kind of system can be either too sensitive or too specific. Like these mics are pretty sensitive. Those fire alarms are pretty sensitive, right? If the fire alarms were extremely specific, as in like they would only detect a fire, they would only go off if there's a fire. There's no other scenario that you go off. You just happen to put mac and cheese in the microwave or something, nothing happened bad, like the fire alarm would not go off. If they're extremely specific, then that's great. Except that when there's actually fire and it ends up missing it because it's too specific, then the whole building is going down. Mm-hmm. Versus that's why the fire alarms and these mics, well, I don't know if that's good for the mic, but at least for the fire alarm, it's more sensitive, as in like it's more likely to go off and have a false alarm even if it's not there. That way, if there's actually a fire, it'll go off and trigger. And the reason I bring that up is because our brain and our whole emotional system is designed in the same way, where let's say there's a test coming up, we're going to be stressed and anxious. And if you really dig, like, why are we stressed and anxious, we would take one step. It's because we're scared we're going to die. But it's kind of a misfire because, like, if we fail that test, we're not going to die. But we kind of project it forward. Like, we failed that test, we drop out of school, this happens, that happens, that happens. We don't have money, we don't have a family. And I think that our brain sometimes misfires because it's very sensitive. But it's better because if you're in the woods and you hear, like, a brushing the leaves, you're likely to go look real quick, like, what's over there. Because, like, if you just say, oh, it's probably nothing and you're too specific, then the tiger's going to come and eat you, you know? Yeah. So it's better to be sensitive. It's better to be fearful. And that's why if you're going on a hike by yourself in the woods and you hear a little ruffle, you'll take a peek. Like, let me just make sure. It's just a squirrel. Oh, just the wind.
Yeah.
But because of that, because we're so sensitive, we're more likely to predict things that are not actually there. As in, like, if you're going on a walk in the woods and you hear the bushes ruffle, you're more likely to think there's something over there than there isn't something over there. And because of that, humans, and maybe other species as well, are more likely to imagine entities that are not actually there. And even in the environment, like people who describe having these like almost spiritual like experiences or these experiences where they saw something, there's a higher chance that it's part of the sensitive part of our brain that we just happen to imagine something that wasn't there. And it's very actually likely for us to do that because of how our brain is designed. And the more I read about things like that, the more I'm like, this whole universe could just be randomness and mean nothing. But at the same time, like giving it meaning does comfort you a little bit, and at least it lets you live a good life. But I don't know, it's like a weird place. And I think that, I wonder, when people are on their hospital bed, as you described, they're either in regret of a specific thing or they're like cherishing memories of their life. Like, I feel like at that moment, like, are people scared? Have you ever met someone who's like scared in a similar way?
I mean, there are definitely individuals that are scared, yeah. It's not that common, though. You'd be surprised. A lot of it is just individuals are ready. It's weird. Yeah.
Just come to terms with it.
Yeah. And I also don't know if that's because, they've been in pain for a long time, either from, like, battling a disease or from just, like, life in general. But, yeah, like, most of them are ready. Yeah. I will say, like, something that you touched on with, like, the randomness of it all. I don't know. It can also be very empowering, right? Because that means that you have full ownership of what you want to do. There's no, if you go by like everything's random, there's no predestined plan. You can do whatever you want, right? There's so much freedom within that space, which I think is liberating. And it knows that no matter what, like I get to live my life for me, how I want to do it, what I want to do with it.
Yeah, but I guess some people would go down the path of like, just because it's all random, it's like, what's the point of doing anything, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, what is it? Absurdism versus
Yeah, I've had that conversation.
the other one. Yeah,
Realism.
The other one is
Realism, right?
maybe.
No, I'm fucking up. This is on episode 20. We talked about this. It's a long time ago. Absurdism versus nihilism, existentialism,
I think
stoicism. I don't know.
No, I don't think it's stoicism.
Hedonism. I don't know. Nihilism.
I think nihilism.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, absurdism is like do it anyways, and then the nihilism is the
Just reject it.
matters, why do it?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see. There's a quote like "Imagine Sisyphus happy," right?
Sorry.
Imagine Sisyphus happy.
What's Sisyphus?
Like the guy with the boulder.
I don't know.
That's blowing it up. So his like eternal punishment in Hades is, I don't remember what he did, but he has to roll a boulder up a hill. And every time he gets really close to the top, the hill just gets so steep that the boulder just rolls back down at the bottom. So he has to go back down, pick his boulder back up, and then roll it back up again. And that's his eternal punishment. And like that's how a lot of people like view life. It's like a repeating cycle of a bunch of things. And people will like an argument that a philosopher has is you have to imagine Sisyphus happy, and that's why. So yeah. And that's like the absurdist view of it, I suppose. But
That's cool.
yeah.
Send it that. Send it with the boulder right at the top of the hill.
Mm-hmm.
We got it on the top of the hill in this podcast.
Yeah, a little bit.
One question that ended off. There's a term in politics called "die on the stand." Have you heard of it?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So basically, a politician or anyone will go up on stage and they'll defend a belief or something they have with their life. They will say that they will go on stage, they will say their hot take, their belief, their opinion, and people will throw tomatoes at them, they will throw rocks at them, they'll get angry, they'll yell at them, they'll call them names, but they're going to die on the stand supporting or defending that thing. So I started asking all my guests in the podcast, out of anything in life, it could be anything, absolutely anything.
I know.
What would you die on the stand for?
I don't remember why. I was asked this question not that long ago.
Really?
Or I think I asked this question to someone else. It was someone that I went on a date with, and her hot topic was it was just like, yeah, what's your like hot take? And I think hers was something about the furry community, and that's what it was. And it was like the furry community does so much good, and they get way too much hate. That's not the hill that I would die on, but I just remember that sticking out.
To each their own.
Yeah, I think for me, my hot take is, I don't really have that many hot takes, which is also like, I think for me, it's just the idea that you should just let people live their life how they want.
That's coming on the podcast, yeah.
Yeah, because like, a lot of people that have been, they'll like try and give their friends advice on things, and especially if it's unsolicited advice, it's not the place, in my opinion.
I agree.
You have to let people live how they want. You can like you can ask them like, hey, I've been seeing like a pattern of behavior or something, and you would like you can offer it, but I don't think that it's within our right to actually be the person that is telling people how they should and should not live their life.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the more important factor is like if they are knowledgeable and they understand the consequences of it to the extent like by all means do what you want to do. And I just know that that's not a very common or very like everyone loves to be able to give their 2 cents. So.
Right. And I agree with that. And I think there's better ways to do it. I think you could still get the message across without coming in someone's face telling you this and this and this and that. Like I think one thing I started understanding recently is an effective way of doing it is just listening and asking questions, because as you probably know, that listening from therapy, etc., that just the therapist doesn't give you unsolicited advice. They listen to you and they ask you questions, and you know all the answers in your own head. And I actually learned this from my physics teacher. He didn't explicitly say this, but after I left his class junior year of high school, I noticed he did something that helped me understand it in a way that teachers hadn't done in the past, where I would always come with a question in physics C, and I'd say, I don't understand this question in AP classroom. And he'll never tell me, look at this, look at that. He'll ask me questions, and he'll get me there by asking questions. And I'll walk away saying, oh, wait, I knew that. But it's like his kind of like this work in the background, pulling the strings of like asking me questions to get me there. But the benefit is that I will understand it now better than if he just told me the answer.
Yeah. So I had one of my math teachers in high school did that, and I always valued it. I do that now to my undergraduates as well when I'm within the research lab, and I don't know if they hate it or not. I think that they do, but like it does get them to the point where they need to be, right?
Yeah,
So,
and it even works like outside of like academic, like even just personal. Like I remember one of my friends, he was telling me that like I'm struggling with time management. I can never get my homework done. I just kept asking him questions like, oh my god, like I understand it now. This makes sense. I just have to do X, Y, Z. And it was like I'm glad he was able to like figure that out for himself and hopefully improve that. But in general, like you don't have to just go around giving people advice. People will know when they need to fix something and they'll find a way to do it. But
exactly. Like as you just mentioned with your friend, him coming to you and saying that, I think is like opening up dialogue about it, right? There are so many people that were just like, the dialogue isn't open, or like they just, they're not receptive to it. So again, I think like when you want to have those harder conversations, or like conversations about things that might be like more advice orientated, I think it's just important to ask like, oh, like, do you want to hear advice right now? Are you open to advice? Or do you just want to like vent about it, right?
Yeah.
I think that's like a huge thing, just to, especially when you are in that setting, asking those two questions. Are you in an advice mindset? Do you want help with something? Do you want us to troubleshoot? Or do you just want to complain?
right.
And so once that person like opens up that dialogue option, they say, yeah, like I would love some input on this.
Yeah, and then they're always open ears and they actually do something. And I think sometimes when someone even comes there, like you immediately want to hit the accelerator and start like yapping. That's something that I've had to hit the brakes on a little bit. But it's so shocking how when you do hit the brakes and you do exactly what you said, like kind of figure out, even if they don't say it explicitly, like figure out like what they're actually looking to do here. And you can hit the brakes and just sit there and force yourself to just try to listen to every word they say. You'll be surprised by when they realize like someone's actually listening to me, the amount they'll open up and tell you things that they've not told anyone before. Like I've actually found that like shocking how powerful that is. But
Yeah.
I don't know, hitting the brakes is hard sometimes though.
Oh yeah, I mean, I love to yap as we've very much solidified here.
2 hours.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But again, it is just like there is just so much you can learn from just listening, and I try to do that so often when I can, and when I do have my opportunity to yap, I yap away. So.
And let's close it at that. Ty, thank you for coming down. I learned a lot today, and I get to see the world through your eyes and the research you do. And I'm grateful you came out and did this with me. And we'll definitely do another one. I'm trying to get one of all the morning gym guys together. So
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for having me. I loved being able to be here, loved talking. So, yeah, I think that we've had some really good convo, really touched on quite a few things outside of just the research too, which was cool.
Cool, man. Thank you. If you enjoyed that episode, then I guarantee that you'll enjoy this episode right here. Make sure you click here to watch that episode, and the best way to support us is to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to hit the notification bell as well. It is the best way to support us, and it'll help us to keep growing, get better guests, better production, and make this the best podcast in the world.